We are so excited for everyone to join us for our second book club meeting of the Book Wyrm Club. Woot, woot, woot. I'm Kat of Kat's Novel Adventures, and I am joined by
Alex from Frank Fiction.
We have created this book club because we love discussing books together, and we figured that other people might want to join us and discuss books with us. So, for those of you that are new to my channel, I am Kat, and I pretty much read a variety of genres. I'm not big on romance. I'm not opposed to romance, but if I do pick up a romance, I like a closed door kind of romance. And yeah, that's about it. I do weekly sprints on Wednesdays and put out a video every week, at least every week or two. And Alex, tell them a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so I read a lot of science fiction and horror, but I honestly read a variety of genres. I really love fantasy. I like historical fiction. I don't read a lot of romance either. I'm not necessarily opposed to it, but I don't gravitate towards that generally as a genre. But a lot of sci-fi, a lot of horror.
Mm-hmm.
And I do reading and productivity sprints every Friday on my channel at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And I try to put out a video once a week as best I can. Pretty much the one guarantee everybody gets is I always have lives, and I try to do another video on top of that. So yeah, that's a
Yes.
little bit about me.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much how I've been lately also. So, for those of you who are joining us, our book that we have chosen for September, October is Boys in the
Boys
Valley.
in the Valley
And
by
Alex
Philip
is gonna,
Fracassi.
yes, is gonna tell us a little bit about what Boys in the Valley is all about. And we want to let you know that we will be talking spoilers. And when we get to that point, I will have a little banner down there telling you, just in case you haven't finished the book or you haven't read the book. But there's so much to discuss about this, and you can't really discuss it without talking spoilers.
We want to get into the meat and potatoes, but
Yeah.
the description, I will not spoil anything. So Boys in the Valley is about an orphanage for young boys that is run by some Catholic priests. And one night there is a loud ruckus outside of the orphanage when the sheriff comes knocking on the door, and a man is bleeding out from mortal injuries, and his skin is completely carved in these occult symbols. And the priests bring him inside, and they realize that something is wrong with him. They believe that he might actually be possessed, and the presence of this man ends up infecting, if you will, the boys in the orphanage. And it kind of creates, you have to pick a side, which side you want to be on.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Lots of choices.
Mm-hmm.
This is a book a lot about choices, just in general, don't you think?
I do. Yes, very much so.
So, as we did in our last book discussion, we wanted to know pretty much off the bat what we rated, our overall thoughts about how we felt about it. So, Alex, you want to go first and share?
Sure. Yeah, I honestly I really enjoyed this book. I was super happy with it. I found it captivating. I felt a lot of dread while reading this. I was generally pretty creeped out, which I enjoy because I don't find it often that horror actually makes me feel kind of disgusted. And I really did feel that with this book. And it's not because it was overly gory, it's because of the atmosphere.
Mm-hmm.
And because of that, I ended up rating Boys in the Valley 4.5 stars.
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, I had lots of feelings about this book. I went into this book with some expectations, and I was happy that my expectations were being met early on. And I had a gambit of emotions. My range went all over the place, mostly negative emotions, I must say. Anywhere from angry to frustrated to anxious to heartbroken. And then I'd have a little bit of gratitude here and there, snippets. It got a little bit of hope here and there. very little. And then I was kind of unprepared for some of what happened. I didn't realize it was going to go in some of the directions that it did.
Mhm.
And early on, I was feeling like this was a 5 star. And all the way to the end, it ended up being a 5 star for me. I
Woohoo!
loved it. I mean, it's hard to say that you love something as disturbing as what happens in this book, but I just loved like the execution, the writing, the pacing. There was just so many things to love about it, which we'll get into all of that because that was one of the questions that you had asked was about the pacing. But before we move on any further, let's see who's in our chat and see what the ratings are for our people in the chat who have read this book, because I know quite a few people have. And please pop in your ratings so we can see before we get into the meat and potatoes of Boys in the Valley. So welcome, Linda. Woot woot. I am here and I am ready. I am too. Linda actually finished it last night while
Nice.
we were on my, so I think that's great. I just I love the enthusiasm that people had for this book. That is one thing I have to say. I don't think I had anybody that was seemed like they couldn't finish it or whatever the case may be. Amy, woot woot. Amy finished before I did. And so I kind of like, was kind of feeling out like her feelings throughout. Hello, Angel. How are you? Welcome, welcome. Jamie, woot woot. I know Jamie finished and is ready to discuss. How go in the house? Welcome. And I apologize, people, if I sound kind of raspy. I've been dealing with like allergy something for a couple of weeks. So I apologize in advance. And hopefully I won't have any coughing. I did tell Alex that I do have cough drops. I have tea. I took Delsum, so hopefully it'll be good. Hello, Angela. We know Angela read it. Angela also was one of the unlucky people who had missing pages. Alex, you want to explain that real quick?
Yeah, so I didn't know this until Angela and Angel was actually impacted by it as well. That some copies of Boys in the Valley had printing errors that cut out, it was about 50 pages of the book. And until she mentioned that, I didn't know. So I had to instantly grab my copy and I was like, oh, flipping through. And mine ended up being okay.
Yeah,
But I
mine was.
apologize. Yeah, I apologize to any of you that I had to acquire the book again or some other means, or had to return your other copy. We had no idea. And Kat was joking with me. She's like, is it cursed? Is it cursed? It's like, no, we're not saying that.
Well, there's a little bit of possession going on here.
Oh, yeah.
So, perhaps
Absolutely.
somebody was trying to play with us. Hello, Rebecca. Welcome, welcome. Hello, Liz. Looking forward to hearing your thoughts. So happy that you're here to join us. And Heidi is in the house, just here to enjoy the chat. We appreciate the support. Keaton. Hello, Keaton.
That's my love. I love her.
Angela says 4 stars for her. Alexis, welcome, welcome. First time joining here. Well, we are happy that you're here. Thank you so much for supporting our book club. We appreciate it. Jamie said 4.25. Also, Amy gave it 4 stars. 4 for Alexis. Liz DNF, so really excited to see it from some different perspectives. I'm curious to understand why you DNF'd. I'll have to talk with you about that unless you want to share like later. Rebecca, 3 stars because it was a little out of my comfort zone. Okay.
It's very fair.
Yeah. I saw the author post about it on Instagram. He said that if you contact him, he will replace it.
What
Wow,
a
that's
nice guy.
awesome. I think so. He seems like a nice guy. He really does, just based on an interview that I watched with him. And Linda's like, the book is cursed. Ah. Yeah, well, I hope not. Although we do know that some of these poor boys are cursed in the book. So we are going to, it seems like everybody here has read the book or is, invested in wanting to hear what we have to say. So I'm going to go ahead and put the spoilers banner up just in case we have somebody pop in after the fact. And that way we can, we can't be accused that we did not give fair warning. So, Alex, what would you like to talk about first?
Did you want to talk about the POVs, the
Oh yeah, yeah,
the
yeah.
four character perspectives?
Yeah, because that was one of the things that I did like about this. I like multiple
Yes,
POVs.
me too.
So, what did you think about the POVs? Because I thought it was very interesting that of the four POVs, not one of them was told from a possessed boy's or a man's perspective. I mean, yeah, Brother Johnson, it gets possessed, but it's not, it's a little bit of mind control, I guess is the
Yeah.
word that you had used when we talked about it earlier. A
Yes.
little bit different than how the other boys are possessed.
Mm-hmm.
When you say,
Yeah. So I loved these POVs because I thought that each one provided a really unique perspective without giving too much away. So first, of course, we have Peter. Peter makes a lot of sense because he, from the very beginning, we know he's going to be kind of the main protagonist. Like he's the boy that's going to bring it all together because he's the
mm-hmm,
one that is training to be a priest, but he has this pull to outside of the priesthood with grace of like, is he going to pick earthly delights, or is he going to pick, being a priest and staying at the orphanage to help raise the boys? And so that perspective made a ton of sense. Andrew's perspective made sense because he is the one who has been the surrogate father, if you will, to Peter and is the one pushing him towards the priesthood. And we know that he wants Peter to be a priest, but he's going to make it hard, which is something I want to talk about, of course,
mm-hmm,
later.
mm-hmm.
Brother Johnson was great because he is our perspective where we already know that there's a seed of evil in him. Like he's already committed horrible atrocities and he's at the orphanage because he's been sent there to live out the rest of his life as punishment for his crimes, which of
Right.
course we end up learning about later. And so with him, you're like, okay, we already know he's kind of a bad guy, but what way is he going to go? David's the perspective that I thought was the most interesting. I
Really?
really did. Yeah, I did. And the reason I like David is because he, for all intents and purposes, could have been the antagonist to Peter. He was Peter's equal. They were both the oldest boys. Peter talks about how David is like more intelligent than him, more perceptive than him. When we're first introduced to David, he actually was not introduced in a good light. He was
Mm-hmm,
actually,
mm-hmm.
he was being punished for something. And so we kind of thought, oh, maybe David's a bad boy. But it turns out he's kind of this wild card. He's like this neutral card of, he hasn't made his decision about what kind of person he wants to be, but we know that he hates the orphanage. And so
Mm-hmm.
he really could have been that antagonist for Peter, but he wasn't. And I love David as a character.
Yeah, I mean, I did too. I did like David as well. I think, because I really, had to sit there and think, we don't get any, point of view from, the boys that are causing all the chaos.
Yeah.
But I think we have a very sympathetic point of view from all of these
Yes.
POVs, in my opinion. Somehow each of them, you can have some kind of sympathy for them or empathy for them.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of felt like, and I mean, this might be a stretch, but I kind of felt like David was a younger Brother Johnson. Peter is a younger Andrew. And they kind of mirror each other in that aspect of it. Before Johnson, whatever happened to Johnson we know what happens to Johnson. His childhood is traumatic. We know that David's childhood is traumatic.
Mm-hmm.
Johnson, of course, decides, I mean, he's not in an orphanage, so he has the freedom more to do and get into the situation that he is in that causes him to lead servitude for this orphanage. David hasn't gone out in the world yet to make that mistake, I guess.
Yeah.
I think David and Brother Johnson kind of represent redemption. They're both trying to find redemption. David's not swayed. He doesn't care for the mass. There's just things about it that he just hates. He hates Father Proul, which is understandable. But there's a lot of like similar personality traits in those two, in my opinion. Whereas like Peter and Andrew, it's kind of like a test of faith. It's like I know that I need to do certain things, but I also am not going to go against, my duties as someone who is representing God, I guess. So to me, David and Brother Johnson are more reactive, whereas Peter and Andrew are more proactive, I guess. So it's just like the opposites with that. David and Brother Johnson are more physical characters, whereas Peter and Andrew are more like spiritual characters. So to me, it was a nice balance that you had that going in there. And not that I think that it would have been very interesting to be in the minds of Simon or Bartholomew or any of the other demon possessed boys, because they wouldn't have been, they weren't interesting.
It would have ruined it, in my personal opinion. And I love what you just said, by the way. I had not even thought about that, the parallel between Johnson and David. And like that was really great. I would have hated to have a perspective from Bartholomew or any of the possessed boys, only because so many stories, I mean, even with Stephen King, you end up getting usually a perspective at one point or another of the villain of the
Right.
book, and you get to see kind of what they're going to do and where they're going to go. And I don't like that, because it gives away too much. The thing that was so terrifying about this book, it was so eerie and creepy and gross and awful, is the fact that you're constantly wondering, well, who's going to get murdered next? Like, how are they going to do it? When are they going to do it? And that, like, it kept me hooked. And had we known ahead of time, I don't think I would have found it as interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I mean, because all they're going to be thinking about is murder, murder, murder. Who am I going to murder next? I mean, that to me is not interesting. That's not even layered. That's just flat out evil. I mean, there's like nothing, no layers to their characters except that they're evil, right?
Mm-hmm.
What I loved about this novel, because I happen to be a reader who loves character driven novels, this was a character driven novel. And I find that the characters were well written and they were layered, and there was good character development. We see a lot of growth in our characters, even our young characters, so I really did enjoy that. I also loved that it was a coming of age story. I also enjoy coming of age stories, and you always think of a coming of age story a lot of times of being a sweet story, or a story that's not as horrific. But I do. I mean, I don't know if you agree with that, or if anyone in the chat agrees with that. But I also liked the isolation. For some reason, I am attracted to stories that are like in remote areas. It adds an extra layer of dread. And also the fact that you add weather conditions that are terrible, like snow and a blizzard. It just adds to that extra, more dread, the anxiety. That's what caused me to be so anxious. It was like every time they were getting to where they might have had any kind of glimmer of hope, then something else would happen,
Yeah.
I don't know. I love that whole entire part of that, how it was set up. And the crazy thing about it, in listening to that interview, is that Philip Fracassi literally wrote this book in 4 weeks.
Are you serious?
I am serious, based on that interview. Now, I have put a link in the description box of our chat for anyone that wants to check out that interview at the Poison Pen bookstore. Because I wanted to learn a little bit more about Philip, Fracassi. I know nothing about him. I mean, this is my first book that I've ever read. First book you've ever read.
I want to read more, though.
Yes, I do, and I found that interesting that somebody, I mean, he's had experience. He's started out as a screenwriter. He's written short stories, and I think he's like in his 40s when he started like tackling horror. He's written some literary stuff, but he really didn't make a name for himself until he got into the horror genre. So I just found that fascinating, that you could write the characters like this in 4 weeks. I mean, he was working like 10 to 12 hours, 5,000 to 10,000 words a day, but really great, that he had it, because he does an extensive outline also, but still. Not me. I would never be able to write anything like this. I'd be lucky if I could write one character.
What you told me is this is the ultimate NaNoWriMo book.
Yes.
Like
Yes.
really what it is, because that is the whole purpose, right, of NaNoWriMo, is to try to write a whole novel in the month of November. So
Yes.
that's
Yeah.
crazy.
Yeah. So it is crazy to me for sure. So another question is about possession. I don't know how you feel about possession stories. They are not my favorite. And I just think, partly that's my Catholic upbringing is the Catholic Church does have a priest that performs exorcisms. That's a known fact. So why would you have somebody on staff that can do that if they don't really exist? And I do feel like, you mess around in the spiritual realm a little bit too much, you might, entice something to come visit you. So it kind of gives me the heebie jeebies. And I'm not a fan of it. I don't read a lot of books with possession. Although in the last couple of weeks, I've read two with very unique perspectives on possession, which is odd. But I really, really, it's hard to watch a possession movie for me. Like that freaks me out more than I think a book, kind of thing. So I don't know how you feel about them. They are not what I generally gravitate towards. But there was a little bit of uniqueness about the possession in the story.
I agree with you in the sense that possession isn't typically something I gravitate towards, but for a different reason. I
Mm.
think that possession is one of those tropes that's very overdone in a lot of
Ah,
cases, especially in horror films. This idea that like, oh, well, now you're taken over and you have no control over yourself anymore, and now you're just evil, and you can commit atrocities against everybody that you love because you messed with a Ouija board or something, and I didn't know what to expect from this going in, and I do try to have an open mind, especially with tropes that I think occur all the time, and hoping that they're going to do something new and interesting. And I
mhm,
really do think that he did in this
mhm,
case,
mhm,
because it wasn't just about the gore, it wasn't just about the violence. Obviously, like that's an important part of the story, but as you said, it's so much about the characters, and the people who are interacting with these boys, and like how they're handling the situation and how that directly impacts them. And it has another one of my favorite tropes, which is children in a
mm,
horror
mhm,
setting, because
mhm.
so that's something that actually gave it like a point in my favor, because I love books like it. Like I love it when you have a
Mhm.
kid that like is seeing something that nobody else believes. They don't, like, nobody else sees it, but they do, and they have to fight it themselves.
Right, right. And what I also liked about it is we have a lot of conflicted characters. All of our characters that we talked about from the point of view are all conflicted in some way,
Yeah.
and so I don't know. It just the fact that also too that the kids could be more in tuned to what was happening more so than the adults, which was kind of perplexing to
It
me.
was so weird.
Eh,
So
I'm
weird.
like, how can you be, so I just wonder if it's because, younger people, you're in a, I don't know, are you not cynical yet or whatever? But my whole thing with that was, Father Poole knew that this guy was possessed because he asked him to name himself, or
And so did
whatever.
Andrew.
And
Andrew
then,
did too, and
so
and
my
completely gaslit Peter about it, which is terrible.
it is. And so I was just like, I can't even understand. And I will get to that because if we talk about characters specifically, but I did like the fact that was one of the things that Philip Fracassi did say also in this interview is that it wasn't a traditional type of possession. It was more like an infection that kind of magnified whatever was undesirable or angry or humiliated or whatever was happening within these boys, that's what kind of manifested out of it, so it is a possession but almost like an infection that just, which is very different, I think, in a way of what happens to Brother Johnson.
Oh,
So,
yeah.
my thinking too is yes, it might kind of be like an infection, but it's also a possession where there is demonic influence because otherwise the supernatural experiencing of Simon and them could not influence Brother Johnson.
Right.
Would
I
you agree with
completely
that?
agree. Yeah,
Okay.
completely agree. Um, I don't know if you wanna talk about, why Basil and why Simon, because I would love to discuss that, like why they ended up kind of being taken on, but not the others. If you want me to start with that, you can go through some
Sure,
questions because
sure.
I know we've
No,
got,
I
or some
mean,
comments because I
yeah,
know we've
let's
got
go.
some
Yeah, let's
good
do some
comments.
comments. Yes, first to see. So Alexis says that I did think there was a darker, heavier side of coming of age, which is relatable. Created depth with the character, which I agree. I really felt for them. Yeah, I mean, you really could. It reminded me of like the feeling that I had when I read The Troop or reading Lord of the Flies or reading It. You know, it's just that it's a heavier, darker experience for them. And they really can't rely on the adults in their life to help them, which, you know, our adults are supposed to help us and keep us safe. And in this situation, they're, you know, not all of them are even, they're not even safe in a normal environment, much less where we have a possessed environment. Keaton says, well, that's crazy if true. I'm
Oh, talking
guessing
about
maybe
how
the
he wrote
amount of time. Yes.
yeah,
The gothic atmosphere, the wild snowstorm, and isolation of the orphanage made it a great creepy read for the spooky season. I agree. And Alexis agrees with that as well. Jamie said, writing it in 4 weeks kind of tracks with the story. It was a quick, fast paced story. He got in, grabbed our attention, told the story, and got out. So well
absolutely.
done. And we have some, you know, Alexis is agreeing with that. And yes, the adults were in such denial. My thing from the get go with that, Jamie, was here you performed an exorcism. And if you know anything about demonic possession, I mean, I know that they were like, you know, like early on, but they still knew about it and they knew how to try to exorcise a demon. The demon has to go somewhere. The demon is not just going to die. I don't even know if a demon can die. Either they're going to
No,
go
it's
straight to
implied.
hell or they're
Yeah,
going to go to into another host. I mean,
yeah.
I just, so I'm just thinking to myself, you allowed, you know, once you knew that you were dealing with a demon, like you should have left. You should have told the sheriff, take your demonic brother and we're going to go elsewhere.
Take Paul. We don't want Paul here anymore. Yeah,
I mean, you know what I'm saying? Like you as a priest, you know that this is happening. You know he is in, you know, inflicted with this,
yeah.
and then you allowed this to be unleashed. I just I don't know. I was just like floored by that. And even to the point, there was a point, and it happened when they discovered Basil and they brought Father Poole in. I almost thought he was also possessed. Very
Oh,
briefly.
cool.
Yes,
Oh,
very briefly. When
I
he
think that,
said that Basil committed suicide, I was like, how could you think? How could you commit suicide like that?
yeah. I
I don't
actually
even
had the exact
understand.
same reaction as you, and then immediately after I had that thought, I just went, "No, he's just a bastard." He's a bastard because he cannot lose control of the situation, and a demon means that he can't handle it because he didn't successfully exercise the first one. You know, the sheriff shot his brother in the head, like that, like they were trying to perform the incantation throwing holy water on Paul. He did not successfully exorcise the demon.
No.
You know, and instead of being like, oh yes, this is, you know, the exact same carvings that we saw on Paul when we took off all of his clothes and he had been shot.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's just, oh, he was an idiot. He
Yeah.
was such an authoritarian and I hated him.
He was a total asshat. That's all I
Yeah.
can say.
Yeah.
Amy says children in horror automatically boost my character investment. I was so
Yeah.
sad reading this as the boys got really violent. Yes,
Yeah.
Amy, I was the same way. There were times where there was actually moments where I had to like pause because I did not know what was behind the door. You know what I'm saying? Like if I open that door, I don't know if I can handle what's going to happen if I go through that door. You know, because if you read enough horror that involves children like that, it's like, how much can I take? I also kind of think to myself, you know, I have two boys of my own. They're adult men now, but like, what if my boys were in a situation like that? You know, how awful, you know, so I could kind of like, I don't know. I agree with you, Amy. Just so hard, especially with some of the ones like Basil. It
He
just
was
broke
so
my
small.
heart.
Yeah, I was
I
gutted
just,
by poor
oh
Basil. And
my
he was
God.
crying out for help right before Peter left. And Peter's like, "Nope, got to go see my lady. Sorry, Basil. Peace
I
out." Like
know.
that was kind of one of those moments where Peter doesn't look as much like a hero. He just looks like a kid. Like that really shows that he doesn't have this adult mentality of like, yeah, I'm a hero. I know how to fix everything. He's literally a child.
Yes.
And he's, fixated on child things. And that
Right.
wasn't
But yes, he's expected to act like an adult,
exactly.
you
Yes.
know? And David brings that up several times. David
Yeah.
is like, we are not going to be in charge of this. We
Yep.
are kids. Who's protecting us? Who's
Yeah.
protecting us?
I like
Okay.
David for that because he was
Yes,
right. The
because
priest should have been there to keep them safe, and they were.
well, I think
Andrew was like, "No, you boys got it. You can, you can take it."
yeah, I don't know. I think David was more grounded in the reality of
Yeah.
the situation.
He was more perceptive, as Peter said. Like
Yes.
he could recognize things for what they were, and that's another reason why I really liked him. I don't think Peter would have done half as well without David.
Oh, I don't think
And,
so either. And
yeah.
also too, I think, Peter was in denial for a little bit like Andrew was,
Oh yeah.
with trying to handle things like, oh no, we're not going to be like aggressive or do anything until David broke down. And he had not seen anyone break down that way until he had seen like his mother. So it
Mhm.
was like at that point, things that didn't bother David, for him to break down and to have that emotional moment, that was like, oh shit, something really bad is happening here. I need to
Yeah.
like, get with the program here and help David out, kind of thing, instead of thinking this is all going to just work itself out, and having the belief that, like to me, Andrew wanting to go down and help Father Poole, it's like, am I a hard-hearted person? I would have been like, you on your own, dude. You were so mean and abusive to these boys, and I didn't agree with half the stuff, and I couldn't speak my mind, and I'm going to go down and risk my life and leave these boys unattended to go check on Father Poole. Oh no, I would have been like, oh, you so holy and you so great. You got this all on your own. I guess I'm hard hearted. I don't know.
No, like Poole really was a bastard. I do understand where Andrew was coming from though, because for him that was the morally correct thing to do. And I get it.
I guess I'm
I
not
really
morally
do.
correct.
No, I didn't say that. I didn't say that. But Andrew's a priest.
I
He's a priest,
understand. I
you know.
understand. But at the same time, it's like, you have to look at the bigger picture here, because
Yeah.
also Poole is responsible ultimately. I mean, ultimately, for allowing this person to come in. I mean, initially he didn't know what was going on, but once he knew, it's like, we should cut, take your little man, put him back in the wagon and be gone. That would be me, because I don't like the devil thing. I'd be like, goodbye. Rebecca says, yes, he keeps your attention and wanting to know what was going on. That man must have been possessed by more than one demon. Yes. Meaning the guy coming. Father Poole had no sympathy for the poor boy hanging on the cross. None, which was mind-boggling to me. None at all. I did not like him. No, he was not a favorite of mine either. And Alex could not stand him either. The only time my anxiety remotely calmed down while reading this book was during the little romance friendship between Peter and Grace. Yeah, that's
Which
the
was really
hope.
sweet.
That
Yeah.
was the hope, especially with Grace being Grace, named Grace, which I thought was, I have like comments about that. I love that David called out the adults. I do too.
David's the
But
MVP.
and then
I love him.
Jamie's like, but was it morally correct leaving the boys to fend for themselves? I mean, he was in a moral dilemma, honestly,
Yeah.
if
Yeah.
you think about it. So it's you've got to decide, no matter what he did, he was going to let somebody down.
Yes.
He was like in between a rock and a hard place. But I think you have to choose of the two, what did Andrew really think he was going to be able to do? He was not
I
really willing to fight these
know.
kids.
He had like a staff. He's like, yes, I will bludgeon people with this staff while they're coming at me with kitchen knives. That was
Yeah,
not
I
not
don't
a
know. I
great
don't even
moment.
know. I don't even know if he could do it because he's dealing with a kid. Like, I don't know if Andrew could ever look at them other than kids.
That's possible. That's
So
entirely possible.
if you can't make that distinction that this is a kid that is no longer innocent,
Hmm. Well, he was also in denial that it was possession anyway. So he didn't think that they were evil. He just thought they were, as he said in his own words, they're angry.
Poole was cruel, yes. I guess he was dealing with his own horrific childhood. I guess so, but I mean, I guess that you can go either way. People who have horrible childhoods either are horrific to other kids or people, or they turn it around and do something different,
Yeah.
you know. So talk about the why. Why you think Simon? Why you think Basil?
I I like the way that you were talking about it being an infection rather than a regular possession because it played into my feelings about how it was going, but I didn't know how to articulate it. So I think that that makes a lot of sense
Mm-hmm.
because with Basil made the most sense. Like he was kind of the leader, right? He was the leader of,
Oh,
in
you mean
my opinion,
Bartholomew?
or yes, I'm so sorry. Yeah, Bartholomew. I got the two B's mixed up. Yeah, Bartholomew made perfect sense. He was essentially the leader, and it all the for the boys, it all kind of started with him because he was the one that had the most recent, like, strongest emotion to the injustice of Poole. Like he's in the dining hall. Simon, he was being mistreated by Johnson. He's being left out of being given food. Bartholomew attempts to give him food, and Poole punishes him for it and is like, well, now you're going to have to give up all of your food to Simon since you don't understand what his punishment is. And Bartholomew's just shoving it all in his face, like, no, I'm not going to let you take what little food that I have
Mm-hmm,
just
mm-hmm.
because I'm trying to be a good person. And Poole tells, Johnson to take him out into the hole. And Bartholomew's terrified that he's going to die. And he's having this horrible emotional reaction to being terrified for his life. Simon is then feeling guilt for that. And because Simon, of course, was the kid, as they say, that was always following Peter. So it was very
Mhm.
strange that Simon would turn. I honestly think it was that interaction that he had with Bartholomew. It was the whole thing over the meal that made it to where his allegiance was different because he also felt the injustice of what Poole was
Mhm,
doing to this
mhm,
kid just
mhm.
because he was trying to help him. And so they were going to be the ones who were most immediately infected, if you will. And then any of the other boys that were just feeling overwhelmingly resentful are going to end up falling into that kind of category as
Mhm, mhm, mhm.
and that's kind of like how I think they were chosen, if you will. But that's also why I thought David was so interesting because he was extremely resentful and he called the orphanage his personal hell,
Yes,
and yet
yes.
was not possessed. And I think that that spoke volumes. And I thought again that made him a really interesting character.
Well, but I also think like David had hopes and dreams. He wanted to be married one day. He wanted to go out in the world and do things and have a farm and or whatever he wanted to do. So he knew intellectually that this was a short amount of time that he had to be here. He didn't have to like it and he didn't have to, he didn't have to really rock the boat. He took the punishments if he did rock the boat, but he was going to do what he needed to do to get out of there as unscathed as possible. So he
Yeah,
was not going to be a willing participant in anything like that. I
yeah,
think Bartholomew had had enough. Both he and Simon were very powerless. So they were both willing vessels, I guess, for this
yeah,
demon to go into. They were very willing, especially Bartholomew, and they tag teamed, he and Simon. And I think because of the guilt that Simon felt, it was perfect for them to tag team. But I
yep,
think it was able to give them an opportunity to have power because they had had no power under Poole.
yes,
They
completely.
were helpless from the whole time. And, I had thought the demons themselves, prior to finding out that that's how Fracassi had viewed it, like an infection, the demons were the catalyst that kind of fueled that inner demon. I mean, that inner anger, and the defiance that was there, it just kind of manifested even more. So I was kind of glad that I kind of hit on that before hearing about the infection part of it, because that's kind of how I felt about it. It was sort of like anybody who had some kind of interaction with Poole that they couldn't get over it, like build a bridge and get over it kind of thing. They were going to lean towards Bartholomew and, Simon. And that was your question. Wouldn't David have made a better adversary? And I just think he was his own person with convictions. He's not easily swayed by someone, and he was going to keep his nose clean so he could get out of that orphanage. That's, I think, why he wouldn't have leaned towards them. I don't think he had really, I think he was kind of neutral, if he had to say anything,
Yeah.
kind of thing. He really didn't want to pick sides. He was kind of neutral because if you remember, there's a point where David can escape and get
Yep.
freedom,
Yep.
and you don't know if he left them or not. Like, you think he left them because he's like, they're dead anyway.
I didn't think so. I didn't
And
think
then
that he did.
I'm just saying, he set it up that way for
Yes.
readers to think that. And
Yeah.
so I, in my heart, was thinking, I can't imagine him being able to turn his back. I think he's a type of person that would have had to have evidence of that, especially at the end when you see how he feels about Peter, at the very, very end,
Yeah. He
Um,
loved Peter, and
yes.
that's why he was trying to get Peter to go with him, actually, to leave to go to the farm, and that was David's moment of not being a noble character. That did show the other side, because of course he went back to rescue them when the building's on fire, but before that, before the building ever caught on fire, he's trying to convince Peter to leave, abandon all the
Hmm.
rest of the boys,
Hmm.
and go. It's like, we can make it. They can't, but we can make it. And Peter tells him, no, we're not leaving. And
Right.
David ends up feeling immense guilt over that later, but at the time he was kind of defeated, like, oh, well, I'm going to die here, I guess.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, I think that I really appreciate, actually, that Philip Fracassi did not make David the adversary, because
Same,
I think that
same.
that would have been the obvious choice,
Yes.
because they were so even, as I had mentioned before. And I feel like that's something that's so overdone. But you have Bartholomew, this little kid that who previously was, just known for being quiet. He was kind of creepy. Everybody thought he was off-putting, and now he's going around like the politician, and he's like this pumped up kind of peacock character. And you just think about this tiny little child against Peter, this 16-year-old boy, and that difference is so much more jarring. It's so much more shocking. It's so much more horrible. And I loved that. And so I'm really glad. I'm really
Yeah,
glad.
I did. I wrote that down. Glad he was not chosen. Because the other thing too is there's something about a creepy kid. I mean, I kind of have a creepy kid in one of my classes that I'm just like,
Oh,
sometimes when I look, I'm like, okay, like I feel like,
oh
oh,
God.
this could go somewhere.
Oh,
I know that's terrible to say, but you meet all kinds. I'm just saying, you meet all kinds. But there's something about little kids that lack empathy, or they give you that smile that is not sincerely a smile. I mean, it's
yeah,
so they were it was off-putting to them, because if you remember, Peter forgets his coat and his gloves and his hat and everything because he's too afraid to stay any longer with them, because he's afraid of Simon at that point. I mean, that's pretty creepy. I mean, if you can't even get what you need to get, like, it affected him in that way, because it was such a personality change for them.
yeah,
Um, so let's see what they have to say. Angela said, I thought Andrew was kind of meek and mild. I agree. Popping in to say hi. Hi, Kaju. Listening with one ears. I haven't read it yet. And Jamie said, and some of the boys just sided with Bartholomew in order to stay alive. That's true. They
yeah.
had that one scene. That was one of the saddest parts of the story. I agree. Because that one boy who did go over, Peter even says he died,
He did.
going over to that
He burned to
side.
death.
Yeah. And the fact that David didn't turn to the dark side really showed a strength of character.
Yeah.
Yes, I think so as well. I was with you, Alex. I didn't believe David would leave them. And
No.
I loved all the biblical names. They were more common back in the day. Yeah. Yeah. So the other thing is Basil. Um, you brought up Basil and why he was chosen. I think myself personally, and this is getting into like religious realm or whatever, but I think choosing Basil struck a nerve for everyone, because even though, like, even David thought he could be annoying at times, he still wanted to look out for him. Basil was someone that meant something to pretty much everyone, because he was such a scared little kid. I think it struck a nerve with people that if anybody that they were going to make a statement with, they chose him, because they could have chose the other little kid that they locked up in the attic, and they did not.
Ben,
Ben.
who
I
did end
think
up dying anyway. Poor
right.
Ben.
Well, I consider him the sacrifice. he's what sets the chaos in motion. He's what I
Yes.
consider the sacrificial lamb, so to
Yeah.
speak, the innocence, and that innocence to rile Peter and David up,
Even
at that
Johnson.
point. Yeah, and even
It even really
Johnson.
bothered Johnson. That was, like,
Yes.
one of the most human moments for Johnson is he's taking Basil down off of the cross and is cradling him. He's getting blood all over his robes, and he doesn't even care. He's not thinking about it because he's just looking at this kid going, "Who could do this to you?" This man who brutalizes the kids and is
Right.
horrible to them is looking at what happened to Basil and is like, "Who could do such a thing?" Like, yeah, it was awful, except everybody except Poole. Everybody
Yeah, no,
except
no,
Poole
no.
thought it was
Pool's gonna make
terrible.
up a story about it, which I'm just
Yeah.
like, how lame is that? And like, would anybody even buy that? No, no one buys that. Johnson
No.
even doesn't buy that. I
He
mean,
does not.
it's not. Um, so I had asked, did Simon and Bartholomew, were they in control of the boys like they controlled Johnson? I think we kind of touched on that a little bit.
Mhm.
I Johnson, I think, was so broken about what happened with his family, and because they kind of throw that in his face, I think that the only reason they could have gotten him on their side is if they did something supernatural to him. There was no way he would have been a willing participant. Do you think that?
So the way that I viewed Johnson's kind of like coming over to the dark side, if you will, is it was supposed to be his really dark moment before he could have his moment of redemption, right? Because they pretty much immediately turn on him. Like he's brought over, he's under this mind control, and then they immediately torture him. They set him on fire, and it's to show Poole like this is the power that we have. And they didn't do that to any of the boys who were under Bartholomew's,
Right.
like in his circle. He only did it to Johnson. And I think it's because they hated him too, but they knew that there was that, as you said, that dark part of him because he had accidentally murdered his wife and baby.
Mhm.
And he felt, guilt about that. I don't think that they would have been able to do that with anybody else because other than the cooking staff, because they talked about how the cooks were convicts as well in a lot of
Mhm.
cases.
Mhm.
Johnson was the only priest with that kind of history, and he, as said when he was strangling Ben, he goes, "Well, I'm damned anyway."
Right.
So for him, he's like, "Well, if I die now, I'm already going to hell, so I might as well live a little longer." That's the
Mhm.
way that I viewed it.
Yeah. Yeah. I just kind of felt like he was trying to seek redemption, even though he wasn't willing to say he was seeking redemption. So I don't think he would have been a willing participant, and that's why they had to put their little juju on him or whatever.
Yeah, well, he was fighting it. They said there was,
Yeah.
he said there was that little part of him that was hidden away that he was like hiding in there, trying
And
to
I
come out.
hated the part, I don't know about you, but I hated the part about the flies in his brain. You know why I hate that? If
Why?
anybody has ever seen or read the Amityville Horror,
Oh, I have not read that.
flies flies are a big thing in Amityville Horror, and whenever that gets brought up in any kind of a thing, like that's what I think of, because Amityville Horror is something that did scare me, even though it came
Okay.
out years later, many years later, that it was a hoax or whatever the case may be. It's still frightening, the images, and like I've read the book and I've seen the original movie and the remake, but
Mhm.
the original movie to me is scarier in some ways than the remake. And the book, I don't know, like there are things about that just freak me out. But so what did I think about? That's what I thought about was with Johnson with the flies and all that kind of stuff. I don't know. That was off-putting to me. I don't know if that was to anybody else, but
I thought it was a really good device because I could envision that kind of buzzing sensation where it's like it just completely overtakes everything, and for him, it just muted out the rest of the world. It even muted out pain, which I
yeah.
thought that was really great. The fact that they were like, "Yeah, we're so strong that we can actually make his nerves not feel." Because at one point,
Hmm.
right after he was burned, he goes, "I feel that if the flies weren't there, the pain would be so encompassing that it might kill me."
Yeah,
And that was so interesting.
and I just thought the way these kids killed people was so awful. Like
Oh, yeah.
I mean, what they do to Johnson
Mm-hmm.
is just uh, horrific. I don't even know how he could have even lived through it.
I do genuinely think that that was the supernatural bit, because if he hadn't like had the fly thing, he would have just died right
Uh,
there from pain, or at
yeah.
least passed out.
It,
But you know, you were asking about, you know, were the other boys possessed too? And I remember in the book they were talking about, you know, the very famous quote in the Bible of, you know, Jesus talking to the man who's possessed, and you know, Jesus asks the name of the demon, and the demon answers, I am Legion, for we are many. And there was a
mhm.
moment in the story where they were talking about, you know, maybe the reason that so many of the boys were infected is because there were so many spirits in that one man, that it like
Yeah.
took over the smaller kids. And I know that you were talking about it being an infection, so it's not like a literal possession of just like a demon flying into a child. But I think that it makes sense why there were so many of them that were bothered, that it was just so powerful, that like the really strong emotions of these little kids, that
Yeah, I
they
mean,
could be so impacted.
I honestly thought that there was literally demons in them because when the doors flew open and the
Yeah,
cross fell, I'm
yeah,
like something touched them.
I thought that too. Yes,
Yeah, and I mean, I kind of still think that there's a remnant of something in them.
yeah,
I
but
mean,
there
you
was a little
can't
piece of themself left too.
a little
Because
piece,
yeah.
a little piece. What freaks me out about devil possession is whenever the demon toys with whoever it is that they're talking to. One moment they're,
Oh, yeah.
horrid.
Help me! I'm
And then
so
the next
sorry.
minute they show you how they use that freaks me out. And you see that not only with the guy who comes that night, but you also see it with Simon and
Bartholomew.
Bartholomew.
Yeah.
And that bothers me too, because it's like, look, you could fall for it, but I wouldn't fall for it. But you could fall. These characters could have fallen for that, and that would have been terrible. Hello, Leslie. Welcome. We are talking Boys in the Valley. Hello, Devin. Nice to see you. They use Johnson as a tool. Exactly.
Yeah.
100%. That's exactly what I thought about the flies. Yes. If you've seen anything with Amityville Horror, I'm telling you, oh, the flies on the windows, every time there was something, and the smells. Smells are also very connected to possession. Certain smells and the flies. Maybe that's what is attracting the flies is the smell.
Oh.
And Rebecca says, I was rooting for Peter and David towards the end because they seemed the most sane. Yes. And I
Mhm.
think both of them, I think the reason they were both sane is both of them had something to live for. David was living for his future self. Peter was holding on to grace. That's what he was holding on to. Now, of course, we know that Alex brought this question up.
I have so many feelings about, did Peter actually have the free will to choose whether he was going to be a priest? Because it okay, I this was the part of the book I genuinely felt betrayed. I felt the same feeling that Peter felt in that moment, because when we're with, you know, Father Andrew and his perspective, he is harping on the fact that, well, he really wants Peter to be a priest, he really is trying to lead him that way, but he's gonna, you know, he's gonna let Peter choose, he's gonna make it hard for him. And then at the end of the book it is thrust upon Peter, and not
Yes.
only that, Andrew expressed that he had already talked to Poole and said, yeah, well, we,
Oh,
you know, had already planned the ceremony for you to be a priest. It's like, was that supposed to be a test? Was, you know, was Peter supposed to look at Andrew and be like, well, actually I want to get married and go have a life with my girlfriend over on the farm,
I
you
thought that
know?
was such a betrayal on
Oh, it
Andrew's
gutted me.
part.
It was
Yes.
awful, because Peter, he had no free will. He did not get to choose.
Yeah.
He had that put on him, and because he was the chosen one, I mean, all the boys even called him Saint Peter. Like they knew
Mhm.
that he was that kid. That's what got him killed. Bartholomew hated him because he was a priest. Because as Basil said before Basil died and Peter left, he was like, "Well, they're waiting to see what you do, Peter."
Yes.
And that's what they meant. That was
Yes.
exactly what they meant, is, are you going to choose the priesthood, or are you going to choose to be a man?
Yes.
And oh, it hurt me so bad.
Yes, I hated that because Peter was more of himself. Peter was already also struggling with a dark part of himself,
Yes.
which is probably in the aftermath of what he witnessed with his father and his mother. And, you almost wonder if there was some kind of divine intervention. I know I'm going there,
It's
but
no, it's
divine
honestly it's implied.
intervention
It's
with
implied.
him living through that because he was in the fire. He should have perished in the fire along with
Mhm.
him, but somehow he's spared. And if he wouldn't have been spared, then we wouldn't have had, I mean, not hardly any of the boys live, but still, whatever transpired at the end, these people coming out of it. And this is where I kind of got into the name of grace and all this kind of stuff. So bear with me. You can roll your eyes if you
I'm
like,
not gonna
but
roll my eyes at you.
I think that Peter earns God's grace through humility by abandoning his desire to have grace as his wife on earth. He has to be humble and he has to go through that humility of it. So that's why I think perhaps he was spared in the fire to fulfill his purpose at the orphanage. I don't know. I don't know if that is anything to do with it because grace has to do with humility, and I do think because he struggles with darkness that he has within, it would be very easy for him to give into that. But grace is the one that gives him the hope. Grace, the person, gives him
Mhm.
the hope. And then he's given the grace to make the decision to do what Andrew wants him to do. And that is to be the priest at the end and to perform. So I don't know. I don't know if anybody agrees with that, but that was my interpretation of it.
I really like that take, and I think that that's a beautiful way to look at it because I look at it in such a harsher way that Peter did not in that moment really get to decide. He's watching Andrew die, and Andrew's like, "Pull out the vial, help me, get the water," and starts performing the rite on him. Like Peter didn't say anything. He's just like, "Oh, I guess it's happening now." And he in that moment in the book, everything's on fire, everybody's screaming and dying. Andrew, the man he thinks of now as his father,
Right.
is laying on the floor, and he goes, "I'm so sorry, Grace." And he
Yeah.
goes, I know in that moment that this is what I have to do, but it wasn't what he wanted. And Bartholomew even said that after Peter is officially a priest. Bartholomew goes, oh, well, I guess congratulations are in order, but it wasn't really what you wanted, was it, Peter? And it's
No.
like, no, it's not. And oh, but I the way that you put that was so much nicer. Thank
Well, I
you.
mean, it to me, it's almost like he has a conflicted heart. And I mean, even if you think about, Jesus, Jesus knew he was supposed to be doing his plan. He had to die on
Mhm.
the cross. That was for everyone to get the eternal life. But there is a part in there where he's like, if you could spare me, you
Yeah,
could
take this
spare
burden
me,
from me, God.
yes, you could
Yes.
do that. And it's the
Yeah.
same thing with Peter, I think, at that moment is he could have been spared, but Andrew, as his father, just like God as Jesus's father, was pretty much, no, I really need you to do this.
I like that. I
You
didn't
know,
think
I
about that, but I
I
like
just
that.
kind of,
Yeah.
and I don't know. I just and that comes because of what you were talking about. You brought up the question about Peter's father as the apparition. Was it a dream? Was it
Well, a message, a
a
warning.
message, a
Yes.
warning? Was it the demon trying to trick him or whatever? I kind
Mhm.
of felt like it was the fear that Peter had because Peter was struggling with the decision. He didn't want to disappoint Andrew, but at the same time, he wanted to have his relationship with Grace, which I think his relationship with Grace was beautiful.
It
And I think
was.
they could have had a beautiful life together and they could have had
Yeah.
children and everything would have been wonderful. So to me, I kind of looked at it as kind of like a warning and that you're given this task, you've given this one task to do, and if you do this, it ends up kind of saving, it's like the eternal life kind of thing. I don't know. I think he also understands what the stakes are, and so I think that's what he has to also make that decision.
Yes. Yeah. I do think that's what it ultimately came down to is he recognized that that was going to be the only way that any of them would make him out alive.
Yeah.
And yeah,
But I was very sad that only 5 made it out alive.
I know.
Honestly, I was very sad about that because you think they were what, 30 boys,
Uh,
30
It was over
boys
30 plus the priests.
plus the
Yeah.
priest and only 5? Now, of
Yeah.
course, the kitchen staff, let me just tell you, what the hell happened to the kitchen staff? Where are they? Did they get
I,
killed?
I don't think they
Did they
did.
run away? And why
I,
did they not go
yeah.
get help?
I think that I genuinely believe that they ran away, and there's 2 points in the book that make me think that. One is that one of the boys actually says, "I saw them running for the hills." So that was one. But the second one was when Bartholomew and all of the boys are in the chapel area with the altar, they're talking about what they're gonna do when they get out of the orphanage, and they're
Mhm.
talking about, "Oh, well, we gotta go over to the houses where the staff lived, and we got to go to that farm." And what they were implying is to murder people. They're not
Right,
going there for supplies, they're going there to kill people, which
right.
means that some people had to get out. And the reason that they didn't get help is because, again, the kitchen staff were also
Yeah,
convicts.
yeah, and with
So,
no moral
yeah,
compass,
yes.
obviously.
Yeah.
I
So
mean,
I
I
really do think they made
understand.
it out.
This is what my husband tells me all the time when we watch a horror movie together. Well, there would be no movie, Catherine, if they do what you say. There would be no book, obviously, if,
Same.
you
Same.
know, there would be no book, obviously, but it's like logically, why could like how could you not have some compassion for boys?
Yeah.
Young boys,
Yeah.
young children, whatever. It could have been an all-girl school for all we knew, but it's the
Mhm.
same thing. So let's see what our chat
Well,
has to
think
say.
you can think about the ending of the book, like, just your own personal ending after the sheriff
Oh
goes to
yeah,
that
I
orphanage
had
burned
yes,
down. They go and catch those people. It's like, "Screw you. Going back to prison. We're gonna put you in a
yeah,
box."
yeah. You deserve it for leaving those kids high and dry. And Devin says, I'm not sure I can read this book you're talking about. I can read a thriller, no problem. Supernatural pass. Yeah, I get it. I understand. And then Angela said the Amityville Horror was the last horror movie that I ever watched over and out. Yeah, it's one of those movies. Like I haven't seen it, and of course, when I saw it, I was younger. So there are movies I've seen as a younger person, young child like person that, I'm like, I wonder if it would have the same impact on me, but I do think it still would just because of its demon possession. And Alexa said, same. I like your take on Peter's situation, Kat. Thank you. When Andrew was dying, I think Pete felt he had to become a priest to give Andrew his last rites. That's true also, but don't you? I mean, I think you can give, even as a layperson, you can give absolution, a blessing, or whatever. I believe if there's not a priest, a lot, in there, maybe not back in that time period. That would have been, terrible. But I think nowadays you could actually baptize someone if there is not a priest available. I'll have to check. And Devin says, I lived in a haunted house growing up. No, thank you. LOL. Yeah, I would not like that, Devin. I am not into haunted houses either. She's the second person I know that lives in a haunted house. I had a friend I worked with that lived in a haunted house. That's awful. I don't think I can handle it.
I was in a group call once where my coworker got freaked out because she saw lights flashing behind me, and it turned out that it was actually one of my bird feeders that had like the glass on it. But she was like, "I thought I was seeing orbs, Alex. I thought you were living in your haunted house." I was like, "I'm sorry.
That's so
No, not that
hilarious.
exciting."
Hilarious. Well, the other thing too is I did have a question, like about the demons. Like who
Hmm.
were the demons? Because yes, you have actual demons, but
Yes,
don't you think Pool was kind of like a demon? Like not like
a
literally
symbolic
a demon,
demon.
like yeah, because like I hated how he used religious righteousness to hide behind to be cruel to these boys.
Does that tie into your question about like how people use religion as a means of abusing power?
Yeah,
Is it kind of
yeah,
tying into
yeah. I
that?
guess I
Yeah,
kind, yeah. I just
yeah.
kind of feel like, I mean, it's evil. I guess maybe demon's not the word. Maybe like evil is, because people have inner demons. That's things that
Yeah.
they have to struggle with.
Hmm.
And can anger be a demon? I mean, can it cause you to do horrific things? Yes, I think perhaps. Um, but the abuse at Poole's hands is just not doesn't sit right with me at all,
No.
because I don't like anything. It bothers me so much for someone to hide behind their religious convictions
Mhm.
and to think it's okay to do some of the things that they do, to rationalize it or whatever.
Yes, I completely agree with that. I think Poole was the symbol of the boy's ire, if you will. Like he's like a magnet for it because he was he was everything that was wrong with the orphanage. Like
Mhm.
even
Mhm.
Johnson, he was the one who put forward the idea of the hole. And Johnson goes, I regret the day I ever
Yes.
told Poole about that. And it's
Mhm.
like Johnson said that. Like Poole is even worse than him. And
Mhm.
that kind of is when everything kind of clicked into place for me of just how sick and twisted Poole was. And there was a really great quote that I loved on page 172. I wrote it down. And it was, so much of religion is ceremony. And I sometimes wonder if priests like Poole have become so entwined with the process that they've forgotten the spirit behind it.
Yes.
And I think that that is so accurate because, I mean, even in like outside of the book in real life, there are people who do hide behind their religion in order to find a sense of authoritarianism. And if anybody were to go against them or were to question, they say, well, how dare you question the word of God? How dare you question the Bible? How dare you question the church? But really,
Exactly.
what they mean is, how dare you question me?
Yes.
And
Yes.
that was Poole. Like Poole, like acted as if everything was for religious fervor, that he was bettering the boys. If they questioned him or backtalked him on something, he punished them because that was what was righteous. He's leading them along the good path. When really, he had a huge ego.
Yeah, and he was
That's really what it was.
physically and mentally abusing these boys,
Yes.
and breaking their spirit. And so they were powerless against it. And he was even, his ego was even after he has all this happened to him, he's still bossing David around, telling David what to do and how to do it. And
Hmm.
that showed you David's character, because David could have been like, screw you, man. I
And
don't
he
have to
should have.
listen to you anymore.
He
I
should
don't
have.
have to listen to you
Um,
anymore.
I thought Poole, I'm not kidding. I actually thought Poole might have a moment of redemption after he's had all of this happen to him and he's like whimpering and his eyes are gone and David comes and finds him. I thought what was going to happen is Poole was going to have David go and get the book so that they could recite the passages for the possession prayer. And instead he's like, no, we're just going to burn everything down. And when
Yeah.
David points out like, but you're going to kill the everybody else too that didn't hurt you, and Poole goes, they'll get their rewards in heaven.
Yeah, I
Fuck
was like,
you, man.
yes, I would have literally wanted to throat punch him. I mean, literally,
Yes.
because I'm like, dude, because think about it. If they would not have done Poole's plan, we would have had more than five
Yes.
boys escaping the orphanage. They
Yeah.
really would have. I
Yeah.
mean, I would just, I was so like aggravated about that, because I can't stand that. I cannot stand when they stand behind their religious convictions and they're going to do it all in the name of God, but they feel like they can get away with it. And I'm like, no, you cannot. It's unacceptable.
Yeah. Poole
Totally
deserved
unacceptable.
everything that he got. And unfortunately, his decisions impacted everybody else too.
Yes.
So,
Yes. I mean, from the get go,
yes.
honestly, from the get go, if he would have addressed, he is to blame for everything. I'm sorry. Poole is to blame in my mind for everything. He let them bring that guy to the orphanage. He knew what was going on, and then he turned a blind eye. Whether he's in denial or whatever the case may be. Okay, you're the adult. You're supposed to be this leader here, and then to say that Basil committed suicide, that really pissed me off. I'm sorry. I'm like, that little boy deserved a lot more than that. the boys in the orphanage deserve to know the truth at that point. And again, we wouldn't have had a book, obviously, if he wouldn't have been like, you know what? Fracassi wrote a good bad guy
He did.
because we're very
Yes.
annoyed by him.
Yes. Poole was an excellent like antagonist. He was actually, in my opinion, worse than the demons themselves, which is saying something. But this might be my controversial hot take. I think that all of the priests were kind of to blame for
Oh yeah,
everything. I
yeah.
think
I
that they were
mean,
complicit with Poole because they didn't fight him. They tried
well,
to act
because
like they did.
there was a point that the whole reason why Andrew wanted Peter to join him in the priesthood was because one day they could turn that orphanage around together.
Right. Right. But he
But he
wasn't
could
willing to
not
do that while
stand
Poole
up.
was
Right.
still alive.
Right. Which it
Yes.
cracks me up, which is why you are against him or whatever. And I know it's a moral dilemma, but isn't he in a moral dilemma by not sticking up for the boys and
Correct.
not defying?
Yes.
I
That was the
understand that
whole
that's his
problem.
superior. I understand that's his superior, but you have the opportunity to get from under his thumb. Let him do whatever happens to him down there and take care of your boys at that
Yes.
point. That's where I was like, Andrew just was not, he was not strong enough
No, Angela said he
to,
was meek. That was a good way
yes,
of
yes.
talking about him.
And I mean, he was a good person wise, but in his role, he couldn't rock the boat. And the poor other guy,
White.
dementia, White, he's got
White.
dementia and is off in La La Land. So I felt bad for him too. Poor little guy. I mean, I don't know. Can we really blame him? I think he was kind of like off in another realm, honestly.
It kind of seemed that way, but I know one of the things we were going to talk about was why were all of the priests targeted, and I kind of jumped the gun on that, but that's why I think that they were is because they were all complicit. And I think that people like Bartholomew and Simon and the other boys, they looked at them and was like, "Well, you're a priest, which means you're bad because you allowed all of these things to happen to us." Even if they weren't the direct cause, even if Andrew wasn't trying to send boys to the hole, he didn't save them from it either.
Right, right. And then when he
So
did try to speak up, he did try to speak up that one time, and
Poole's
Poole
like, "Don't you
corrected him.
dare ever
Yeah.
question me in front of the boys again."
No, and
Yeah.
that raises the question too of maturity. If you think about it, David could have been in the same camp because of his feelings towards Poole, but I think his maturity, he was more mature, older,
Mhm.
not to buy into that or whatever the case may be. But yeah, I don't know. Poole just got under my skin. I know I got that comment. I said that already. I'm not sure. Okay, she said that too. Where am I? Why am I not? Ah. Okay, yeah, we have this. Devin says, in Buddhism, yes, you are or you create your own demons, I think. I think you can create your own demons. The treatment of the boys in the orphanage is everything Catholicism should be against. Exactly. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about how this story came about, too. I learned this in this interview. I didn't listen to the whole thing. I was kind of listening to it, like in the background kind of thing. Poole's actions were unforgivable. I agree. This all sounds like a scene in the newer series, The Exorcist, The Orphanage, the abuse of young boys and forcing them to choose. Heartbreaking. Yeah. Pitting one against the other. What time period does Boys in the Valley take place? It's early 1900s, and in like 1905,
Yeah, Amy's
something like
next
that.
comment was
Yeah,
1905.
yeah.
Yeah.
Agreed. All the priests were complicit. Yes. There are no clear leaders among the priests. Yeah, and that's the other thing too. Poole could get away with it because they were remote. And that's another power play, is that I can do whatever I want because I don't have anybody watching over me. And
Mhm.
the reason why that they were there is because the whole premise was that they thought this was a church. They thought this town was going to flourish. It did not. So they built the dormitories upstairs on the second floor
Because they were
because
poor.
they
Yep.
had to justify building that building. And so, and also too, the starving the kids too. I understand, but times can be lean, but withholding of food to me is so abusive. So
Oh,
abusive.
so
You've seen
awful.
that in many horror stories. You'll see that kind of throwing around that power. How do you think the boys are going to be able to do what they need to do if you're starving them? So it's like everything that they think they're doing is actually like causing more harm than good. So that's
Mm-hmm.
what, it just doesn't make any sense. The other thing I wanted to tell you is that the orphanage is based on an article that Philip Fracassi read. I didn't hear what the article was, but a long time ago there was an actual orphanage that was run by priests, and somebody would come and I think audit from year to year. And you know how when they mention, Peter mentions like every year some of the boys will pass away just because they're ill, or
Mm-hmm.
they starve, whatever happens. Apparently there were a lot of boys that were missing at this orphanage, and so an investigation was done, and they found out it wasn't just like because they were ill, that there was some abuse that was going on that actually killed these boys, and they were kind of covering it up. So it's around this time period or whatever, and so that's kind of what kind of planted the seed about the setting of what was happening with that, which I always love knowing what the inspiration is with a writer.
In the beginning, this book reminded me so much of the Nickel Boys. If any
Oh,
of you have read that,
yeah, I have not read that.
I will heavily encourage you to read that book, because I honestly believe that you will really love it, and it's deeply impactful. And the boys are in a similar situation. There's no supernatural things going on. It's
Mm-hmm.
pretty much a historical novel book. But what happens is you have these boys who were juvenile delinquents, and they were sent to this facility, and it's segregated, of course, so everybody's treated horribly, but the black children, the children of color, are treated even worse than the white
Mm-hmm.
children, and their
Mm-hmm.
accommodations are worse. And the abuse that they suffer at the hands of the people who run the
Is atrocious.
it's really bad.
Mm-hmm.
And that story was so impactful, and I'm not even kidding you, I was probably 40, 50 pages in, and I just went, this reminds me of the Nickel Boys. And then the similarity kind of ends there, but like the fact that they had to farm and work the land and grow their own food and
Right.
everything, that's in the Nickel Boys too.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I hated the scene. I hated the scene. Oh, that was one of my questions. Was there any scenes that were difficult for you to read, or hard for you to read? I think that was the question that I had.
Yeah.
And I hated that scene, when Simon is sent to go wash his hands because Johnson didn't think his hands were clean enough,
Hmm.
and to come back and to know that not one of those kids were willing, like no one left him anything. Like they didn't even think to leave him anything.
Bartholomew tried, man.
Well, he tried, but you
Yeah.
know what I'm saying? Like if
Yes.
you and I were in that situation, Alex, we
Yes.
would have taken whatever and put it on his plate. It would have been on his plate already, and he would have come back, and there would have been no argument about it. So my whole point with that is that just goes to show you, and I think there's even Peter even says something about it, that
Yes. I was going to
as
try to find the quote, but I won't
as
be able
sad
to.
as you are about what's going on and your heart is breaking, the gnawing of the hunger inside of you is so strong that you can't, you're doing something is wrong, but you're compelled to do it,
Yes.
because that you need it just as much. And
Yes.
to put kids in to put anybody in that position is horrific to me. And that's where, your humans are monsters kind of thing. And that's what you're saying, in some ways, Poole is worse than the demon, because he's got a moral code he's supposed to be following, and he's not kind of
Well, let
doing that.
me let me ask you a question I did not put forward before this discussion. Had the boys only gone after the priests, they had not killed any of the other boys, would that have made them seem more justified? Like, let's say they were only going after Poole and they were trying to murder him. Would their cause have seemed more just?
Yes.
See? And we can look at that, and even though like we're people that we don't want murder to happen and things, we look at that and we're like, yeah, well that makes sense, but you should leave the boys out of it. Um, it's like
Except I
its
would
own
not
little
have wanted
quandary.
I would not have wanted Father White to be killed.
Would you have
I
wanted
mean,
anything to happen to Andrew
I
or
wouldn't have wanted
Johnson?
anything really to happen to Andrew or Johnson either. I mean, I know Johnson did a lot of bad things at the hands of Poole, but that just goes to show you how much Poole had power, because Johnson really could have just knocked his lights out and
Oh
said,
yeah,
you
he
know
was the
what, dude?
dog.
I mean, he could have done something, but that just goes to show you that as much as Johnson had his past and had all his issues, and he did that, his, caused the accident with his wife and his child or whatever because he was drunk, he still had a moral compass
Mm-hmm.
that he wasn't going to defy that, because he didn't want to go back to prison, because when he was in prison he was put in the box all the
Box.
time.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I mean, that I say immediately yes, but at the same time it's like, really, it was Poole. And but let's just think about this for a second.
Okay.
Okay, because this is 1905, right?
Yes.
Think about us today. Let's just think about us today, especially women in the workplace.
Okay.
How many people stick up or stand up to their overbearing boss if they have one?
Not if they're
How
afraid of
many
being
turn?
fired.
Yes, exactly. So when you think in terms of that, it's not right. I don't know a lot of people that would put themselves in a position that they would for somebody else,
Oh
like
yeah.
if their job is in jeopardy.
That's why it's so awful, is because it's something that happens every day, and that's what makes it so bad,
Yeah.
right? Like the type of horror, in all honesty, Kat, that is the most scary to me, the things that are the most compelling, are things that can actually happen. Like, it's
Yes.
not the
Yes.
supernatural, it's not like, I don't know. The things that I should say, the things that could actually happen to me, those are the things that scare me the worst. Um, and there was a level of separation that I can have with a book like this. Like, I can find it enjoyable because I don't think I'm going to be possessed by a demon.
Yes.
You know what I mean? And but if this were to be, I don't know, about like a woman being stalked by a man or something, something that feels very viscerally like possible.
Mhm.
Those things, like I actually have a really hard time reading them.
Yeah. So the thing, I mean, so if you look at it from that point of view, you know, Andrew and Johnson, because of their circumstances, I mean, I guess what kept Andrew in his position was the boys, was
Yes.
his love for Peter, was
Yes.
his love for the other boys, because Andrew could have been reassigned. He could have
Yeah.
left and said, I am not going to work for him. An investigation could have possibly happened, or depending on how much power Poole had in the church. But then
Mhm.
again, maybe Poole was at this orphanage because he was horrible somewhere else. And so it was a way for the church to get rid of Poole. Whatever Poole's doing in his little remote area of the world, we don't know what's going on. And unless somebody says something to us, we're going to think everything's hunky dory over there.
Well, you were talking about hope, and Andrew's hope was that Peter would help him turn it around, as you said.
Yes,
And so, like,
exactly.
that's what he's holding on to, is like, well, one day it'll be better when that guy dies. So, yeah,
Yeah, but then at the same time, he's compelled to go help the guy.
yeah, I know. I know. Andrew is a very complicated person.
Yes, it's complicated. The relationship, how when people put relationship, then
Uh-huh.
relationship
Complicated.
and complicated, that would be Andrew, complicated when it comes to Poole. Looking at themes, what kind of themes, are in here? Of course, I think it's like the good and evil, the
Mhm.
choices, making choices,
Mhm.
everything's about choice in here. If you think about a lot of choices, the adults have to make choices, the children have to make choices, the demon even makes a choice,
Mhm.
you know um then also the psychological and physical abuse that's in there, and how it causes trauma, an absolute opposite of what you're trying to instill in these boys. And then also the trauma and the mental health of these people. All of these kids coming into this orphanage, it wasn't like any of these kids came into this orphanage because of good reasons.
No.
So that trauma and infecting, that's kind of infected them in their mental health as well. So yeah, did you have any other like
I
things that you were thinking of?
To add on to those, I would say the idea of having to grow up too fast. Like this book, it is so fast paced that you don't necessarily get the true feeling or years that these boys have been here and like having to live this life every day for so long. I mean, this takes place over like 3 days. You know what
Right.
I mean? But we get this idea from David and from Peter of like, well, they're the oldest and they've been there the longest, and this is kind of how it's impacted them. Imagine if this had been over like 1 or 2 years,
Oh yeah.
or we had seen them starting like Peter at 16 and going to be like 18, and how much different he is as a person. I felt like he seemed like, even though he was still a kid and he still cares about teenage things like love, which is great, um, he seemed to me like a very mature character, but he was
Hmm.
forced to be that way. Would he have
Right.
been that way had he stayed with his family? Probably
Yeah.
not. He's
No.
he's not gonna be reading Latin, you
No.
know? And I do think that, like, imagining what these boys are like when they leave and how much older they probably seem than their years,
Yeah.
you
Yeah, I
know?
think so. I think so. And in some ways, I feel like David's even older than Peter.
Oh, yeah. He holds up his hands, and they're all gnarled because he's been smacked with a ruler so many times his hands have been broken and cut,
Yeah.
and,
Yeah.
he's like, this was my life," and, nobody should have to go through that. I mean, David really is a cynic. And I
Hmm.
mean, after everything he's been through, and I would argue, like, he's more cynical than a lot of, like, 30 somethings that I know,
Yes.
and he's a
Yes.
child, right?
Yes.
So, I do think that they were forced to endure so much trauma and so much hardship that, like, they were destined to seem older than they were.
Yeah. Yeah. I think so. Angela had said there was no clear leaders among the priests. Yeah. They were kind of just winging it, I guess. Starvation and harsh working conditions were taking their toll on the boys. Let's face it, the place was horrible even before the demons showed up. Yeah.
So true. Mhm.
Yeah. I mean, we get snippets of it here and there because of stories that are told, based on what, the boys are, David and Peter, when we learn a little bit about the younger kids. Keaton says, are you familiar with the Magdalene? I don't know if that Magdalene laundry murders in Ireland. There are a lot of parallels here, as its labor force consisted of fallen women sent to work to these working asylums. No,
I
I
did
don't know
not know
anything
about
about
that.
that. Yeah, I might have to
Keaton, I'll
check that
ask you
out.
about that later.
I watched the documentary on that, Keaton. That's what Devin is saying.
Oh god.
So, um, do you have any like last thoughts, or what? This is what in my mind I think is going to happen. I think that David knows that Peter was going to have this wonderful life with Grace. I think David's going to marry Grace.
Oh, is that your head canon of, like, what happens? I don't know, maybe David's not sophisticated enough for Grace, Peter was this, like, soft boy who wrote letters, and David doesn't show his feelings. He's not allowed to have feelings.
Yeah, but
Maybe
they
he
might,
did.
maybe he will though. And because they have the commonality of their love for Peter, which brings us to that question, the
Oh.
question that you asked.
My final question that honestly I do not have a good answer for, so I'm gonna let you start, Kat. And my question was, what did Peter mean when he said he saved them all at the end of the novel?
Okay, so I kind of didn't really think about it. And then when you pose that question, I'm like, oh, was there something terrible that was supposed to mean? I have to go back and read it. So at first I was like, did Peter bring the demons with him? I'm like, and I didn't get it kind of thing. But then when I reread it, I think it means that he saved the boys who perished at the orphanage, even the ones who were possessed by the demons.
That he saved their souls. Like, that
Yes.
was his last, yeah, so that was the way I interpreted it as well, of, like, because he became a priest and he was kind of able to be that light, that he, even after they passed or they died in those circumstances, he was able to help them and their souls
Mhm.
were are surrounding him and he was seeing their ghosts, is kind of what I thought. But I wasn't entirely sure because that was a very, like, is this the, the raving of a boy who's very clearly dying and these are like his hallucinations he's having? I don't think that Philip Fracassi would do that. I think he meant for Peter to truly be seeing spirits of people.
That's what I thought. And then it almost was even like, did he see his mom and his dad?
Yeah.
Did
Or
he,
Johnson.
was he
Yeah.
seeing Johnson? Was he seeing, Basil? Was he seeing, Simon and Bartholomew? I just kind of felt like, everybody that had perished there at that point. So then I'm thinking, I hope there wasn't something else, because when you first posed the question, I was like, I didn't even think about it that deeply. I just was so sad. Like I literally was like tearing up. I was just so sad. I was like, I mean, he wasn't even going to get to marry Grace, but now he's not even going to get to be a priest.
I know, but don't you find it odd, the idea that he could have saved them simply by being a priest, by being this good light for them, because they made their choice. If you think about it, a lot of those boys, the ones that chose violence and they chose their anger. I know Bartholomew in the end, he came out of it, right? And
Right.
he was like, I think my back's broken, and you see like him finally in that moment as he's dying, that he kind of came to. But were they absolved? Bartholomew goes, please, I think what did he say? Please pray for me, Peter's, or absolve me, Peter. I
Mm-hmm.
think that's what he said. And when he did that for Bartholomew, was that by proxy for everyone else because Bartholomew was the leader?
Possibly.
I wasn't really sure
Well,
about
and
that. That was
also
the part I was
too, also
confused.
too, also too, I think you have to think about what your belief is about the afterlife. If you believe that you have to believe what kind of God, would a God damn a child in the situation that they were in?
One would hope not.
You know what I'm saying? Like you have to
Yeah.
really think about from that perspective. I just think it's your belief in that. I personally feel like Peter, when he says that, he feels that they have been saved. Their souls have been saved. Whoever he is seeing, which I'm
Hmm.
lumping his mama, his daddy, Johnson, whoever,
Yeah.
in that. Because even his father, even though it was so terrible what his father did to his mother, both his mother and father were in like dire situation. They were in a situation where they were having lack of food and all that. I mean, that doesn't excuse you for doing that, but when people are so desperate and they've lost all hope, you know, like even do you think they're going to be damned to hell for that?
Yeah.
I don't know. It raises a lot of questions, that fine line of what your belief system is with that.
I just realized something too, that Peter's father is kind of almost a one for one of Johnson, except because like he also killed his wife, but when the apparition appears to Peter of Peter's father, his father tells him, "Well, I thought about killing you too, but I decided not to." And Johnson, murdered accidentally his
Yeah.
wife and his child. And I was like, is that supposed to have any meaning? Probably not. I'm probably reading too much into that, but I just thought of that.
Well, you just wonder about those parallels,
Yeah, I do. And this was such a great story. I mean, I think that we've had two really great books. I mean, not everybody thought they were as great as we did, but
Yeah, yeah.
I think that they were great. We've had two
Yeah,
great
so
books.
if anyone has their overall thoughts or,
Yeah.
like anything y'all want to say before we, end our discussion? Because I'm pretty much finished with whatever I have to say about it. I really enjoyed this book. I liked the pacing. That was a question you had asked also. I liked how it kind of started off slow. I don't mind a slow burn if there's a payoff. And I felt like that it was a payoff. I think you had to get the lay of the land and how things were and kind of slowly get to know these characters. I like that. I was fine with that. And then it just ramped up, and I really enjoyed that aspect of it. How about you? I mean, how were you with the pacing?
I would have to agree with Jamie's assessment of like he came in, he conquered, he got out. Like
Yeah.
the whole thing was fast. I didn't think any of it was slow, even the beginning,
Mhm.
because we pretty much get right into it. So I very rarely read books that are this paced this fast, let alone do that very well. So
Mhm.
good on
Yeah.
him.
Yeah. I wonder if that's his screenwriting background
Could be.
that helped with that. Hey, Alicia. I'm really late, but I'm here. Hello. We like seeing you. Keaton says, well, is it a narrative about salvation through the church? If Peter is the rock biblically upon which Christ would build his church, then Peter the apostle, then Peter would be
A reflection
a
of that.
reflection of that, ironically or otherwise. Yeah, it's a good thought. And what are y'all reading next? Oh, yes, we're glad you asked. Let me see what other comments, Devin, to wrap this up, and then we'll go into that. I think you picked two great books. Thank you both. Thank you, Linda, for participating.
Yeah, thank
It was a
you.
great choice, especially for spooky season. I agree. I haven't read this book, but after hearing the discussion, the book reminds me of The Reformatory.
Hmm.
And big message, I'll ask Alex later. Yeah, I think you do raise an interesting, question about that. There's a lot that has to do with Peter in the church and being the first one to go out and witness and all that. So, yeah, I'll have to think about that, Keaton, and email Alex with my thoughts.
Please do. I can share them.
Yeah. And then getting back to Devin's question, what are we reading next? Well,
Do, 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 do.
devolution.
No, we're trying to go with the
Devolution.
themes of like the months that we're reading. And technically, we got two snowy books, but this is not a horror novel. This is a thriller, right? Is this a
This
thriller?
is a thriller with a cryptid.
Yeah. Yeah. With
Yeah.
Bigfoot. Is
But
he as
what's great
Bigfoot?
about it too is, yeah, Sasquatch. Yeah, this is told through Kate Holland is the person. The journals of resident Kate Holland, who is recovered from the town's bloody wreckage, captures a tale too harrowing and too earth-shattering in its implications to be forgotten. So Max Brooks brings Kate's extraordinary account to light for the first time, faithfully reproducing her words alongside his own extensive investigations into the massacre. It's the Mount Rainier massacre, I believe.
Yes.
Kate,
Yeah, that sounds
yeah.
right.
So anyway, that is what we're going to be reading next by Max Brooks. If you're not familiar with Max Brooks, he wrote World War Z and the Zombie
Good book.
Survival Guide. And he also happens to be the son of
Mel Brooks,
Mel Brooks. Yes.
one of the best directors of all time.
Yes. So this is what we're going to be reading. And our next live discussion, because this counts for November and December, will be on Thursday, December the 19th. 5
Yes.
p.m. Pacific time, 7 p.m. Central time, 8 p.m. Eastern time.
Mm-hmm.
So if you are interested, please check it out. There
Oh,
is a
it'll be on my channel too.
yeah, yes, it's going to be on Alex's channel. She will be hosting, and we do have a channel in the Discord. If anybody's interested in sharing their thoughts along the way with that. So yeah. And let's see. Angela said, wow, Philip's post on Instagram includes my complaint to Amazon about missing pages. Ooh. Thank you for introducing me to these different genres. Already have the next book. Excellent. And can't wait to read the next book. I'm so glad you're going to be joining us and reading it. Love, you guys might like Stolen Tongues. I read Stolen Tongues. It's about the Native American cryptid. Yes, I read that back in January.
That one creeped you
So
out, didn't it?
the beginning creeped me out.
Yeah.
Yeah, the beginning creeped me out. It kind of needed to be shorter, condensed. It would have made a better short story, in my opinion.
Got it.
The beginning, yeah, that is the scariest. Anybody who's read Stolen Tongues, that is the scariest prologue beginning I have ever read in a book, to where, like, I read it at night, which was probably the mistake, on sprints, and had to take my dogs out after. And like, I was freaked out. Because if I would have heard any kind of whispering, I would have been like, come on, hurry up, hurry up. Or y'all going to have to deal with whatever's out here. So, is there a Discord chat? There is a channel in my Discord on Cat's Novel Adventures. You can, there's a link for the Discord in our description box for this live chat. And there is a channel for it. We just ask that if there is anything spoilery that you would say, to just please make sure you use those, double lines, so that it blocks it out, so it doesn't ruin it for anybody who's doing that. But you can chat in that about it. We have people that do. I mean, I had lots of different thoughts every time I was getting to a part.
I'll join for the next one.
I was basically chatting with myself, I think. And Jamie said, looking forward to Max Brooks. Well, I had to get it out. I had to get out like, oh my God, this is like happening. I need to talk to somebody. It was like 2 books in one. I really enjoyed it. Yeah, it was actually like 2 separate stories, Stolen Tongues. And I think it just could have ended at this one point and it would have been perfect. Yeah. Thanks to you both. Really enjoying this book club. Well, we are enjoying that y'all are hanging out with us, and we really do appreciate it. Do you have any last thoughts? Are you hosting sprints tomorrow night, Alex?
I am, yes. So I will be on my channel for sprints starting again 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. If anybody would like to join, would love to see you there. We always have a great time, and I ask questions. I don't do Mad Libs like Kat, but I do ask some questions that I think people usually find to be pretty fun. So
some of them are tough. Some of them are really tough. You have to think. You have to try to see if you can figure out a loophole to justify your answers.
Become a lawyer. You can become a lawyer through through me. Yes, I like to I guess cause existential dread, not in a true way, but in just like asking questions that make people go, I don't want to pick that. I don't want to pick that. So, but yeah, I've loved this, and thank you all for coming.
Yes.
And thanks for having me, Kat, as always.
Oh yeah, as always. I mean, I love it. And I also will be hosting sprints on Saturday morning. If anybody's looking for sprints for Halloween-a-thon, I'll be starting at 8 a.m. So you can have like a double feature, Alex on Friday evening and Kat on Saturday morning. And with that, we are going to bid y'all adieu. And we will see you very soon.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.